Hey, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Tremor, and today we are going to continue with the Game Engine series. We are going to create a Git project on the website github.com, and we are going to sync our current code with this newly created project. But before we start, let me tell you something about Git in general. So if you write code, you have like different versions of your code, right? Let's say on Monday you change something, that would be version 1, and on Thursday you change something else, and then this would be like version 2. So now you have version 2, but version 1 is gone. But what if you want to go back to like version 1 of the code? You could store the versions manually. This would be okay for a small project, but as soon as you have lots of changes and maybe like different people working on the project, this will get very complicated. And that's where Git comes in, or that's where, like in a more general term, a version control system comes in. And Git is one of these. Git has a lot of features, like most of them we will probably never use. But the major features for us would be that it supports branching, meaning that you can have a branch within your project for the different stages of the development cycle. Could be like development, like a dev branch, then a test branch, and a whatever, like a production branch. You can have multiple people working on the same project. This can also be on the same directory or like even on the same file. And Git will then try to automatically manage and merge the different versions of the different developers. If that should not be possible, you kind of have to do that yourself. There's also like a second part to Git, which has nothing to do really with Git, but is a service which is provided by different companies like GitHub or GitLab. And that's a remote storage for our code. So we can take our Git project and upload that to, for example, github.com. And then the project is stored there, and we don't have to worry about like our code getting lost, or I don't know, we like deleting something by mistake and then it's gone. If GitHub takes care of that properly. Like it could be that they lose our code as well. Let's hope they have backups for that. You can also, or like there is also one like negative point. If you would store sensitive code, or for example copyrighted code, and someone would break into GitHub, then they have your code. So you always have to think about like the positives and negatives, but in my opinion, the positives outweigh the negatives here by a lot. So it's actually good to use a service like GitHub. So I just paused the recording to look up who maintains Git and who owns GitHub. And Git is maintained by a guy called Junio Hamano and is an open source software under the GPL license, and was initially developed by Linus Torvalds, who is the inventor of Linux. And GitHub is owned by Microsoft. So you can see they are like separate entities, while Git is the code to create and maintain our projects, and GitHub is a like remote storage service to store these Git projects. So now that we have the introductory stuff out of the way, I'm going to put myself into the bottom right corner, and we will continue with creating our Git project. I already have github.com opened. And you have to be logged in to create a Git project or a Git repository. We're going to click on that plus button and go on new repository. This gives us this like web page, and we will enter the name for the project here, and we will call it Lucy Engine YouTube, which is available. We don't add a description. And the important part here is now to make this a public repository so you guys can access that as well. And we can ignore all of the other stuff and just click on Create Repository. And since the repository is still empty, we see this kind of default screen here, which tells us how we can fill this project with files. So the question is now, how do we get files into this like remote repository? There are several ways. I think you can actually somehow also directly upload files here with like an upload button, but we are going to use a so-called Git client. There are, I guess, hundreds of these Git clients for Windows. One of the most famous ones are the source tree app, the GitHub client themselves, then there is like Git Kraken, and I'm using a client called Fork, which is a paid piece of software, costs 50 euros once, and then you have the license, you can use it. But if you want to use a free client, you can use the source tree app or the GitHub client. So I'm going to open Fork now. And within these clients, we can like maintain and manage our Git projects. I'm going to go on File and Clone. That's like the terminology here. We are cloning the repository from the remote storage to our local PC. So you are going to copy the URL here, and then we go into the client and on clone, it's already in there. And then we choose where the project is supposed to live on our PC. I have a separate repository directory for YouTube here, so I'm going to choose that. The name of the repository is Lucy Engine YouTube. So we just click on clone, and this should be really fast because it's an empty project. So after we cloned the project, we will now copy the files from our Visual Studio project into the Git projects directory. And all the time I have been saying Git project. I think the more accurate term would be Git repository. So I'll try and call it Git repository from now on. So we just take the files from our Visual Studio project directory and copy them into the Git repository. And you will instantly see that the Git client is recognizing the changes, and we can all see them here. So we could just commit and push that to the remote repository, but we actually don't want all of these files because the Visual Studio files are really unnecessary because they are just for my local Visual Studio project. And also the compile directories from Visual Studio are not necessary. And also all those solution files are not necessary. So what we are going to do is we're going to use a Git functionality called git ignore here. We're just going to go into the Git repository directory and create a new file, a text file called .git ignore. And within this file, we can name directories and files which are supposed to be ignored by Git. So I'm going to put the project directory on the right side, and I'm going to put the editor on the left side. We are just going to add the .vs directory. We're going to add the x64 directory. Then we're going to add like every file in the root directory that is called that contains the string vcx project, whatever. And we are going to add everything that is a solution file, like an SLN file. And if we go back to our Git client, we should only see the Lucy directory, which is the source code for the engine, the vendor directory, which contains all the like third-party library files, and also our license files, license for GLAD and license for glfw. And it contains the git ignore file itself and the main CPP file. And you can also see that everything is green here, which means that like everything is new, because like obviously these files didn't exist before, so everything we add here now is new. So now that we have these files inside of our Git repository, we are going to commit them. Committing something means that you are creating a version of the code as it is now. You are taking the code which is inside of the repository and you are committing that into the repository, so you are creating a hard version of your code, which is now like fixed inside of the Git history. But before we can commit anything, we have to stage the files. They are now all unstaged, meaning that the Git client like recognized the changes, but they are not like officially taken into the Git project. They are all unstaged now. We're just going to go here and select everything and then right click on stage. This might be a bit different if you are using a different Git client, but in general, this should all work the same way. And by the way, you don't have to use a Git client. You can also just install Git Bash, which is just a Git API, so to speak. And you can then like manage and maintain your Git repositories via a command line. But I find it easier to work with a graphical user interface here, because you can see the changes. You can like you have like a nice window, and for me it's just easier to work with a GUI here. So now that we have like everything staged, we need a commit subject, and we just call that initial commit. And now we can commit the files, and let's do that. And now we have a main branch here, which is a Git standard name. And the files are all committed to the project, and in the project's history, in the commit history, we can see the initial commit with all the files that we have committed into the project. So now we only have a main branch. Everything that we committed went into the main branch, but I want to have a development, a dev branch. So I'm going to do a right click on the branches row here and click on new branch. We're going to name that branch dev. And now we have that branch, but it's not checked out. We still have main checked out. So we're going to do a right click on dev and say check out dev. And then we are going to use another Git functionality, which is called merging. You can take the contents of one branch and merge that into another branch. So we're going to right click on main and say merge into dev. That gives us a small window. It already says that the branch can be merged without conflicts, and we're going to do that. Just click on merge. And now we see that everything is inside of dev and main. And all these changes are still only local on our PC. If we go back to the GitHub remote repository and we click on code, there's still nothing there. And to actually get the local files in our online repository, we go back into the Git client and we select the branch and we go on push. And here we can choose the branch. We are going to push our local branch dev into a new remote branch called origin and dev. And we're going to push that. And it's already done. And if we go back into the repository now, we should see a branch called dev with our files. We can see our like renderer class, and we have the main file here. We see the git ignore, and the wonderful thing is that nothing of the stuff we specified for git to ignore actually made it into our online repository, so that worked too. And that's basically it already for the process of creating a project, cloning it onto our PC to make it a local repository, and then adding files and committing them and pushing them back into the online repository to have them available here. So most of the stuff I did here now will not be relevant for you. You don't have to create the project, and you don't have to do this initial commit. You don't have to create the branch. This will all be there, or well, that already is there on the online repository. But I want to show you the workflow of like what happens if we change a file now. So I'm just going to go into the Git repositories directory, and I'm going to open the main file in just a text editor. We don't need Visual Studio right now. And I'm just going to add a space here, like a white space. And now main CPP should turn up here. And you can see that I added the white space here, and I can now stage the file again. And I can add another like commit message. And I could just commit that now into the Git repository, but we will not do that. We instead will discard this change. So we go on unstage again. We do a right click on the file. We go on discard changes and just discard, and it's gone again. And if we go back here now, like Notepad++ tells me that the file was changed by an external application. Do you want to reload? I say yes, and the white space should be gone again. And this concludes the episode already, because I wanted to make a shorter episode, since the last episode about the renderer was actually quite long, a lot longer than I expected actually. And I'm going to go back into full camera mode here. Thank you for watching. If you want to contribute to the engine's development, let me know. The contact details are in the video's description, and there's also like an email address. There is the address for my Discord server. So if you want to join me in the development, I would be very happy and I would much appreciate that. If you like this video, then leave a comment, like, and subscribe. I would appreciate that as well. And the next episode will probably come out in 2 weeks. And I'm not sure what I will do. We will probably have a coding episode, and I guess I will implement either the entry point for the engine or the window class, so we can wrap our GLFW code for window creation inside of its own class. We need that anyway. Again, thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.